We're very excited this morning at the top of this hour to be joined by the co-hosts of Pod Save America, Jon Favreau, Jon Lovett, and Tommy Vitor. They all alumni of the Obama White House and presidential campaigns, and now co-authors of the new book, Democracy or Else: How to Save America in 10 Easy Steps. Guys, good morning. It's so great to see you.
Good to see you, too.
You're also on tour. It's like your Era's tour. You guys are everywhere.
Yeah. It's big summer.
Brooklyn tomorrow night, right?
That's right.
Boston Friday night.
Yeah, it's big.
Yeah.
I noticed you called him Marty Short. Is he like a friend?
That's a fair criticism.
That's cool.
Yeah,
no, it's cool to call him
Short.
Marty. Yeah, no, but I just...
You know, because we had Steve Martin in the clip there calling him Marty, and I think I adopted.
I like that.
I didn't deserve to call him
No,
Marty.
I just was
You're
like...
right. No, that's fair.
Sorry to bring it up.
We wrote a book.
Oh, yeah, we wrote
putting the host in his place. Unbelievable.
Anyway, the book, Jon, the book. So let's talk, before we dig into the details of the book, which is practical, useful information for people who want to get involved in this process and not just lob grenades from Twitter. Let's talk about where you guys think we are right now in terms of this presidential race. Heading into the debate on Thursday night, obviously this is going to be a margin of error race. We look at the 7 swing states. How are you thinking about this cycle? Tommy, I'll start with you.
I feel like it's a 50-50 race, and it couldn't be tighter, and everything matters. And I think this debate's going to matter a lot. You know, there's some threshold questions Biden has to answer about concerns about his age. So he has to step up there and be the vigorous Joe Biden we saw at the State of the Union and show people he's ready to do the job and, you know, give as well as he takes. And then I think Donald Trump has to go up there and try not to remind people of who he really is, which is kind of an unhinged, you know, the Donald Trump, the Twitter feed. So those are the kind of competing, I think, objectives of this debate.
Jon, you, of course, were speechwriter for President Obama at his right hand for many years. As you think about debates and the preparation that goes into those, what is it like in those rooms, having those conversations with a candidate when the stakes are, whether they downplay them or not, so high, when you only get 2 of them in this case?
Yeah, usually the candidate's not too happy. It's not their favorite thing to do debate prep. At least it wasn't with Barack Obama. But I think for the first debate, for any incumbent president, it traditionally doesn't go well for a few reasons, because they get too defensive about their record. They don't like being challenged. And everyone knows this. And Ron Klain, who's prepping Joe Biden, knows this. He told Barack Obama that. Didn't really work in the first debate, but I'm sure that Joe Biden has learned lessons from watching that debate closely. But really, you don't want to fill the candidate's head with too much. You want to just make sure that there's a couple goals that they need to walk off the debate stage having achieved. And I think for Biden, the main overarching goal is he wants people to go away with the impression that he cares about the American people and Donald Trump cares about himself. And every answer has to filter through that larger frame.
So, Jon, how does he do that? Like, what sort of attacks line should he have ready to go after Trump? And how does he also project to the American people to answer the question, like, yes, he's still up for the job?
Yeah, I think he has to do what he did at the State of the Union, right? I think if he can show up, have energy, remind people that while there are legitimate reasons to have questions about someone over 80 being president, that at times, yes, he is, he moves slower, but the comparison, right, is that Joe Biden may seem older, but he's still mentally, psychologically, emotionally up to the job. Donald Trump on the stump may get energy from a crowd of nuts, but is emotionally, psychologically, and mentally unfit.
Yeah, Joe, that's what we always say. If you actually think that Joe Biden is the one slipping, just pour yourself a drink, sit and watch an hour or 90 minutes of a Donald Trump rally and reconsider.
Yeah, reconsider. I want to throw this open to the whole table here, because you guys just have so many interactions with so many people throughout the course of your day and the week. It's really kind of a 2-part question. When you have people that come to you and they're catastrophizing over the fact that Donald Trump actually could get reelected after all the madness, what do you tell them? And then what happens when you get to where I get rarely, but I do get there, where I start catastrophizing? I go, wait a second, you've got this guy that tried to overthrow American democracy, said his vice president deserved hanging, 34 felony counts, and you just go down the list, says he wants to execute General Zeta. And it's a 50-50 race. In those dark moments, what do you say to yourself about this country and how we get through this?
Well, when people say, could Donald Trump win? We say, yes, of course he can win. And that's why you should actually get involved, because we're going to be a bunch of nervous Democrats watching the debate Thursday night, a lot of Americans. And we can't really, at the end of the day, control what Joe Biden does, but we can control the outcome of the election, because the upside of the fact that Joe Biden only won by 40,000 votes across 3 swing states in 2020 is that every single person can have an even bigger impact in a closer race. And the reason that we wrote Democracy or Else was to let people know that following politics can be terrifying, but getting involved in politics doesn't have to be terrifying, and it can actually be fun and it can be impactful. And look, there's a lot of people who do not follow the news. In fact, most Americans don't follow the news as closely as we all do. So, Joe, to your point about how could it be so close? For a lot of people, they haven't paid attention to all the horrible things Donald Trump has done, or they forgot about it because they have busy lives. And, that can depress us, or it can embolden us to go out there and actually persuade people to remind them what Donald Trump is, and also tell them what another 4 years of Donald Trump would be like, and what Biden has been doing to fight for people, and what Biden will continue to do. So it's frustrating, but it's democracy, and that's the way we save it.
It seems to me, John, the point of your book is the old line from your former boss, President Obama, when a crowd would boo his opponents. Say, don't boo, vote, go get involved, go do something.
Yeah, I mean, that is part of why we think the book is hopefully helpful in this moment. There are a lot of very good reasons to be cynical, angry, frustrated, worried about politics. A lot had to go wrong for someone like Donald Trump to get within 100 miles of the Oval Office. A lot. And all of those problems, they didn't turn on the day Donald Trump won. They didn't turn off the day Joe Biden won. There's a lot that we don't have control of, but there's a lot you do have control of. I was in North Carolina this weekend. There was a race for a state representative turned by 500 votes. If they had kept that seat, they might have been able to protect abortion in the state of North Carolina. If you are in that district, yes, the news may be depressing. You may be worried about what's happening nationally. But if you knocked on doors, you could personally reach the number of people that could change a policy as big as that in a state like North Carolina. And I think more people need to understand that once you get out there and participate, you discover that politics outside of the internet, outside of what you see online, is actually much more additive and positive than what you tend to see if you just look at your phone.
And if you just look back to 2020, Tommy, the margins are so thin in a place like Georgia or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, pick your swing state, that a few people getting involved or not getting involved, as John said, could be the difference.
Yeah, literally thousands of people. I mean, I think we all have the moments where we sit at home and spiral about politics or life. For me, they're called Sunday evenings. And so what I'd say is, in the moment, maybe take an edible and go to bed. And then the next day, wake up, talk to some friends who live in a swing state, see who they're voting for, talk to them about the things they care about, see if we can get past the personalities of the two candidates and talk about, what does this vote mean for you as an individual? Do you believe that climate change is real and a problem? Well, there's one candidate that has done something about it, and there's one person who thinks it is not man-made. Do you think women should make their own decisions about their health care? Then Joe Biden is pro-choice. Donald Trump has a very different vision for the future for women's reproductive care.
So what's the answer then in this dynamic where polls suggest so many Americans don't like either candidate, right? This double haters. And we know that that group has sort of decided the last couple of elections. How do we see that going this time? And how does Biden try to win those back, people who don't like him?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to have to remind those double haters of what they really hated about Donald Trump. And he has benefited, I think, from being off Twitter, from being out of the limelight. Sickos like us watch his rallies for 90 minutes on YouTube. Most people do not. And so I think highlighting those things is going to be a part of it. And then Joe Biden has to tell them, here is what I will do if you give me another 4 years to fight for you. These are the obstacles that are standing in my way, and this is how I'm going to overcome them.
Here's how the guys describe the sort of the thesis of this book. Quote, Democracy or Else is an effort to put down on paper the lessons we've learned along the way. Lessons that will hopefully transform you into a savvier, saner, well-armed citizen, well-armed with knowledge. We've also gathered advice from some of the best organizers and least annoying politicians around, thank God for that, because if the roller coaster ride of doom and hope we've been on for the past few years has taught us anything, it's that no one has all the answers. We all have a role to play in figuring this stuff out, and doing it together is actually the fun part. John, the fun part. So for people who do doom scroll on social media or perhaps watch cable news and fret every morning or night about where the country is headed, What are some of the things you can get out and do? You lay them out in the book: volunteer, organize, just on a practical level. What can people do to perhaps change the course of the race?
Yeah, look, I think getting involved in politics, and you can start in your own community, your own state. Like everyone, we're all following national politics, and that can depress us, but you can actually have a bigger impact in some of these local races. And so, you can join your local Democratic committee. You can join plenty of the groups that have sprung up since Donald Trump won, the grassroots groups that are trying to get people to vote, register to vote, and just talk to people in your neighborhood, in your community. You're going to be more persuasive with someone who knows you, who trusts you, than you are just, tweeting at strangers online. And it's actually going to make you feel better about politics too, because you'll realize that people in real life are much more understanding and open than they seem just following this online.
It's the thing you always say, Joe, just get out there, start knocking on doors, put in a yard sign, and you'll get the feel of the race and perhaps influence a couple of votes along the way.
Yeah,
Look at George Santos.
Nothing like that. Knock on doors. Yeah, exactly. Knock on doors, and it's pretty remarkable what happens when you actually get out and start talking to people that are going to decide elections. So I wanted to ask you all also generally just about the Democratic Party, the health of the Democratic Party, the state of the Democratic Party. There's always, there's hand-wringing coming from all sides. Oh, Democrats are too radical. They're losing white dudes in the Midwest. Well, that ends up not really being the case. It seems that the white dudes in Wisconsin, older people and everything else, seem to be holding a bit more firmly to Biden and Democrats than other groups. But we hear it every 4 years. Oh, there's going to be Republicans are going to get a record number of black voters, a record number of Hispanic voters. I mean, there does seem to be some slippage. How serious is that? And what does the Democratic Party need to do to re-engage and reconnect with some of their most faithful voters?
I think the biggest divide in politics right now is between people who are paying close attention to politics and people who are not. And so if you look at polls of voters who say that they're following the race closely, getting their news from TV, getting their news from newspapers, Joe Biden has a huge lead with those voters, and that's true within the Democratic Party as well. I think where he's struggling is among younger voters, black voters, Latino voters, white voters, people who just aren't paying as close attention to politics, who aren't tuned in. And one of the reasons they're not tuned in is because they're cynical about politics and they're frustrated about politics. And the way to turn that around, I mean, this is what the whole campaign's about. This is why they're going to spend all that money, and they have so many staff in so many battleground states, because this is going to be a race about making or trying to get people's attention as best you can and try to force the choice in the election. Again, this is not we try to get people to think that, like, your vote is not about rewarding or punishing Joe Biden or Donald Trump. Your vote is about you. Your vote is about your future. It's about your family. And when you get people to think about how this election actually matters to their own lives, then you see a lot of these voters, and by the way, they're voters who cast their ballots for Joe Biden in 2020 and have just become cynical since. So it's easier to get those voters back than to get people who've never voted before to actually vote. So when you actually talk about the stakes of the election, you talk about what Joe Biden's done, what he's going to do, you start seeing a lot of these voters move. And you see this in focus groups and you see this in polling as well. So
hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.